Welcome to the Growth League podcast, where we interview business owners who have experienced quantum leap growth in their business. In each episode, we're going to dive deep into our guests' firsthand experience about what it was like 90 days before and 90 days after that point when their business started experiencing massive growth. So I am here with my friend and guest, Mr. Chris Kneeland. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So
for those of you that don't know Chris or haven't heard about Chris before, he's an interesting guy, a man of conviction. And I'll explain what I mean. But
I like that. I'll take that.
A quick background on Chris. He was in a prior life as the marketing manager for John Deere and Home Depot, right? John Deere first and then Home Depot. And then you were CEO of your agency at the time, Watermark. And co-founded the Gathering of Cult Brands, the
Yes.
Cult Agency, and Communo. Tell us a little bit about what's keeping you so busy right now. What's your main focus?
Well, my main focus, I think, in the real immediate term here is, the Gathering is this remarkable thing, but it's called the Gathering, and that's a hard thing to do in a socially distanced world with government restrictions and trying to look into our crystal ball to predict not just practical things like vaccines, but corporate policies and travel and expense budgets and when people are going to feel comfortable getting back together again. So we're really committed to making sure that we can do something, but it's going to be a combination of physically gathering with smaller numbers and then virtually doing something. But I don't know about you, but I think most of the virtual conferences that were sort of these last minute pivots have sucked, you know. And so I think TED has always done it well. I think whether you are one of the lucky people in the auditorium or you go to YouTube and watch a TED Talk, I think that's just it feels different than eavesdropping in a Zoom meeting. There's a production quality there. There's multiple cameras. There's a stage. And so we've been really busy the past couple of weeks trying to figure out what we're going to announce. We know the event has already moved from February to April. Right. And we made that decision in the summertime, and that felt really conservative. Yeah. We would never have guessed that another wave was going to be hitting us in the early spring. So that's kind of top of mind right now.
I mean, Banff in the spring as compared to Banff in the...
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways we've always been tempted, not just Banff, but I mean, the Gathering this year we're going to experiment with some other U.S. locations as well. We've always aspired. I mean, TED is really the crown jewel. TED is an event, but TED has content that's relevant 365 days a year. So we've been looking into, we have a podcast that will be announced. We have what we call Inner Sanctums, which is more regular doses of content. The 3-day event in Banff will always be the crown jewel, but we want to be able to allow more people access and make it relevant year-round.
The reason why I say you're a man of conviction is that, and I want everyone listening to go and check out Chris Kneeland on LinkedIn after this and read his, I call it a personal manifesto, but you are convicted or on a mission to not allow brands that want to scream their message from the rooftops using, CPM models and mass media approaches. You're not personally going to allow them to win. And are you? I mean, you believe in creating brand tribes, communities, loyal followers, and earning your awareness through the mouths of others. Can you talk about your personal mission?
Yeah, I do. I learned actually, I think in the Gathering year 2 or 3. It's sometimes difficult to know what you're fighting for, but it should be really easy to know what you're fighting against. Right. And so we defined a villain, and the villain at Cult is the reckless overuse of mass media and markdowns. Sometimes in my own hyperbole or in my own rant, I can come across as anti-advertising, and I'm not. I think that advertising absolutely has a time and a place. I just get really, my emotions range between sad to pissed off of when I go into businesses that have tremendous potential to be successful and significant, and they're wasting discretionary dollars chasing a degree of volume where they're just shouting all the time, or a form of bribery where they're discounting all the time, in ways that devolve the relationship and devolve the brand. And when you've seen what good looks like, when you see brands that can actually charge premium price points and do very little advertising and put that money either into their pockets as profit or into customer experience, things that actually matter, you're just like, why isn't everybody doing this? Right? So I really do believe that there's a false paradigm that if I can simply disrupt the paradigm, the behavior will be easy. People will be like, oh, okay, well, if that's not true anymore, and in our case, that paradigm is the purchase funnel, and the idea that we have this overemphasis focus on awareness. I didn't debunk the purchase funnel. Harvard did, and McKinsey did. Smarter people than me. I'm just kind of being a disciple of it, saying, okay, guys, if that's no longer true, then why is this entire industry and all these behaviors still beholden to a false belief?
So when you're looking back on life at the end of it all, whenever that is, how do you know if you've achieved? Or is this a mission that won't be achieved, and maybe it's the pursuit rather than...
No, I do think, I would hope so. I would hope that I would put myself out of business, that my job, somehow I could declare mission accomplished. I remember when we started Cult nearly 10 years ago, some reporter asked what does good look like? And I said I want there to be 1,000 engagement agencies. So it wasn't like I thought Cult has to be the only one. I wanted the world to shift from an advertising agency model to an engagement agency model, which was more of a hybrid of what a business consultancy does. Which, ironically, I mean, in the past couple of years, consultancies have become ad agencies' biggest threat. They're gobbling up agencies, or they're winning over, work because they are more data-driven. They're more welcomed in the C-suite. They're more about solving problems with real solutions, not superficial communications and stories and whatnot. So, I think that the shift is happening. Every year they announce the increase of paid media. So last year we breached $200 billion in paid media, and I always consider that as like a proof point of how much I'm failing. Like clearly the trajectories are going in the wrong direction, and every year I see the price tag of Super Bowl commercials that go up, and I think, oh my gosh, I got so much work to do. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but that's fine. I'm not planning on retiring anytime soon.
Good. So the Growth League podcast is all about dissecting how companies go from the garage to scale. And typically there's never one moment in time where the hockey stick curve occurs, but whether it's for Watermark or Cult or Communo or the Gathering, can you reflect back on a memorable tipping point where it went from, okay, all of a sudden now we have processes, people, service, and product that position us for scale? And what was happening sort of the 6 months before, the 6 months after, that was necessary to the construct of that scale?
I've read the book, The Tipping Point. I'm familiar with the, and I'm a disciple of How I Built This with Guy Raz, his podcast, which kind of interviews entrepreneurs. And I think what I've learned is tipping points are holy grails that don't actually exist, because the idea that you're going to cheat, you're going to land some piece of business, you're going to hire some rock star salesperson, you're going to win some account or get some piece of PR, that now all of a sudden is easy. I think that's the allure. You're going to get to some point where it stops feeling like you're climbing up the hill, and now you're coasting down the hill. And I don't think that happens in the same way. I've been I got married in college. I had a child in graduate school. I have been really, really poor, and then I've been fairly affluent. And it's always like you kind of spend as much money as you make. right? Like so you always feel like, you know what, if I had a little bit more, I could do these extra things. And so I feel the same way about business. Like even if something got easier, then you're just going to make something harder on yourself.
Right.
Like, okay, this was easy. Now let's go to a different country, or let's change our systems, or let's upgrade to something else. So I do think it's a perpetual state. So I certainly, in none of the businesses I've been associated with, ever felt like we've made it. There could be times where I don't feel like, I can't, how am I going to buy groceries next week? I'm not, you can get to a point of some financial independence, but I was at Home Depot when they were a big box darling. They were building a store a day.
Right.
Basically everybody, they invented the category of big box retail. And yet we would have emergency meetings on a regular basis about, how are we going to do this, or else some horrible thing was going to happen and we were going to disrupt the business or cater the stock price. And so, I no longer give much mindset to a tipping point, and I kind of think about a different framework, which I learned from a guy named Dan Sullivan. You follow any of Dan Sullivan's strategic coach stuff? But he talks about measuring forwards versus backwards.
Right. Leading and lagging.
Yeah, and so, if you're measuring forward, it's like you're never going to get to the horizon. Right. And so you'll be in a perpetual state of disappointment. Versus if you measure backwards, you'll be able to track, look how far we've come.
Sounds like my wife, a perpetual state of disappointment.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to discipline myself more to not, that way you remain appropriately hungry, but you also cut yourself some slack and say, you know what, we have achieved a fair number of goals.
So there's this obsession of growth though, right? You talk to any company, everything's about growth, scale. To what end though, right? Because if you've seen what both sides of it look like, I guess what I want to dig into is growth is important because companies, in my perspective, are an opportunity or a platform or a shell to have people realize their potential within or fulfill themselves within, and that's why we've built such a good culture here at Hook and Ladder on that topic. But so growth is important. What do you think is absolutely necessary from going to a place of it's my own sort of individual consultancy to an agency or to a company or whatever it is where we can make opportunity available for other people? What are the necessary ingredients?
Yeah, so my opinions on this have changed of late because both Cult and The Gathering are organically grown. We grow it through our retained earnings and through frugality and smart decisions we try to make, versus Communo is investor funded. Right. So we have a huge injection of capital, and with that comes, particularly early stage tech startups. You don't just have an expectation of growth, you have to be a unicorn. Right. They want $1 billion or bust kind of a mindset. So it's weird kind of going to work on different days with, which master am I serving here today? As a student of cult brands, I've always believed that the best way to ruin a company is to go public. I think once you go public, it's usually a liquidating event for the founder who made it awesome. Right. So at some point, they tap out and cash out, and you're handed over to people who are less committed about being awesome and are more committed now about creating shareholder value. And I hate the concept of shareholder value. I think Harvard Business Review has written extensively about how shareholder value has been a paradigm that has destroyed probably more companies than it has helped, unless you just call a spade a spade. Right. If at some point a business exists as a financial vehicle for investors, then say that's what it is and stop pretending like you're going to be culturally relevant or significant. You may luck into it, but that's not why it's there. Versus like the companies that I adore the most, I can think of the Red Bulls or the Patagonias of the world. They're privately held, right, and they're awesome because the founder has a desire to have a legacy and wants to have something more awesome. So from my own personal perspective, I now think of, I don't believe in perpetual growth. I believe in more like the natural height of a tree. And at some point, a tree stops growing tall, right? A tree can do other things. It can gain girth. It can add more branches. It can change colors in the fall. It can have more value. You can put a tree house in it or a tree swing. But if the goal is to just keep putting fertilizer into the ground so that the tree grows to the moon, it's never going to get that way. It will eventually topple. And I think that's what we need to acknowledge is, what is the natural size of this, and then shift your strategy from growth to maybe profitability, maybe significance, maybe something more. There's the B Corps now that are about making the world a better place and stuff like that. So I just think it's more about having more self-aware about calling a spade, and what is it?
Right.
And if it's in hyper-growth mode, so we do that with Communo all the time. We say, we kind of quote unquote, we're not building a real company in the sense that there's 100 things we would do differently if this thing was going to be a $10 million company. But if it's going to be a $100 million or $1 billion company, there's going to be things that you invest in and things you don't invest in an effort to kind of get there. And who's your customer? Is it the customer, the user, or is it the investors that have given you money? Is it the VCs that you hope will give you money? And so I just think that we need to be more transparent about who are we actually serving and why, and make sure everybody's clear about that so that you don't get frustrated about why aren't we investing more in this area, because that's misaligned with the target of our growth.
Right. So then would it make sense based on that to, obviously then you want to visualize what the purpose of that company is intended to be, and then reverse engineer the growth plan?
I think so. And that's hard, right? Because, the world changes. Communo is such a great example. We're focused on businesses now, whereas the first 3 years we were focused on agencies. So I don't know that we would have predicted that 3 years ago. So you do need to have the ability to make some pivots along the way. But, Communo always had a macro socioeconomic trend about the rise of the freelancer and the contingent workforce. So it was unbridled by geographic boundary. It was actually accelerated by COVID. Like the adoption of remote workers helped Communo instead of hurt Communo. So I think that our ambitions were different than, say, something like, I really struggle putting a monetary figure on Cult. I'm not trying to be a 20 or a 50 or $100 million agency. Those aren't motivators for me. I aspire that I want to be able to call somebody and they say, hey, stop what you're doing, Chris Kneeland's on the phone, and that they'll come pick up the phone. So I have a significance metric for Cult, not a financial metric for Cult. Now, do I need to be $40 million in order for the person to maybe? So financial implications may be a contributor to my goal, but to just put a financial metric out there, it doesn't motivate anybody. My employees don't care how much money we have. And if you're not a shareholder, why do you care? You're not financially benefiting from that. So I do think size is a bad proxy for success, and success is a bad proxy for significance. And you got to decide and be clear about what you're really building.
So with Communo, the Gathering, and Cult, going on that tree analogy, are they all full-grown trees yet, or how much more growing do they need to do?
No. I don't know what the name of saplings. What's a small tree?
What's the purpose of those three, and what percentage in your gut are you at in terms of it being a full tree?
So the easiest would be the Gathering, because we want the Gathering to become we want it to trump the Cannes Lion Film Festival. So that has both a number of attendee, a revenue, and a cachet metric that would kind of say, really, in the Hollywood metaphor, we want the Gathering to be the Academy Awards. And so
for brand marketing, for
brands that are trying to find ways to determine what does good look like. So we would love the brands to be able to say, I was deemed a Cult Brand of the Year by this association, and that means more to me than other personal accolades that they may have achieved. And in that sense, I think we have a pretty good 20-year plan for the Gathering, and we're on year 8. So that has implications, even what we talked about. So
in year 1 and 2, winning an award at the Gathering meant almost nothing. But now there's meaning behind it.
And you can see it. You can see it now when we send out the nomination letters. You can see it now. I used to have to spend the first 30 minutes explaining who I was and why we were on the phone.
Right.
And now it's about my team's been to this, or my friend went to this and my friends received this. I'd like to be a part of this. I had just the most fascinating conversation a couple weeks ago with Traeger Grills. And Traeger Grills had just done an activation, a co-branded thing with Yeti. And Yeti was the Gathering People's Choice Award 2 or 3 years ago. But it was like this guy was like saying, you know, this is the kind of conversation I've been wanting to have for years. Not so much just about the Gathering, just about the things that you guys represent are the things that I've always believed go into making an amazing brand, and nobody talks about.
Right.
And so the Gathering seems to be my tribe. There seems to be a place there that my people congregate. So I do think that we've given ourselves a 20-year horizon to kind of say, okay, how do we be, and that has implications on a global, you know, the Gathering's still way too North America. Frankly, it's still probably still way too Canada. And it's still just this 3-day event, so all the extensions that can go off of it. Cult is also not even at the halfway mark yet. And again, I think mostly about global reach.
Right.
You know, we're doing a project right now with a company in Brazil. We had a chance over the summer to go to Croatia, and I'm like, we're just scratching. I don't even know these brands. I don't even know these stories, and I don't even know if my philosophy. All of our research was on North American companies. Now, you know, we could argue Coca-Cola is not an American brand, it's a global brand, but the playbooks that we studied, the people that we've interviewed were always building North American responsibilities. So I get very excited to think about how much of this is gonna apply, and I need all new examples and case studies because they don't know who these brands are that I'm referring to. And then Communo is clearly in its infancy. I mean, Communo, what's interesting when you raise money is you'll talk to investors about, you know, we're getting ready to raise a Series A, and then, but you're already talking about, but we know a Series B and a Series C is coming, you know, down the pipeline, as well as you're entertaining offers from businesses that are much bigger, and you start to decide, well, if selling, is that selling out, or is that actually a way to amplify the vision? Because I believe if you're truly purpose-bound, if you're a truly purpose-led organization, you would gladly either quit or be sold if somebody who's more capable of achieving that purpose is achieved. I think about all the, there's just way too many nonprofits, way too many small cancer societies or whatever. It's like, well, if you really believe that you exist to eradicate the world from cancer,
wouldn't you come together?
Yeah, wouldn't you think that your resources would be better spent with larger organizations that could do
Well, I guess some
more
trees
impact?
get built and grown so that they can be chopped down, a house created out of it.
Yeah, turned into something else there. Now you're taking the metaphor to a whole new area. So I think it's just the punchline is I don't believe in growth for growth's sake.
Okay.
I believe in intentional growth for a specific purpose, to fulfill a greater purpose.
So on the journey from here to the purpose fulfillment for each 3 of those companies, what's the biggest lever that needs to be pulled for the Gathering? What's the biggest growth lever from a strategic standpoint, and then for Communo, and then for Cult?
I think the Gathering is hindered by our own dreams and ambitions. We need to think bigger. I mean, and what's so beautiful about the Gathering was I would never have been able to concoct it. I would have thought, who are we? Why us? Why now? And I remember my business partner, who's a much better dreamer, talked about like the Grammys. Right. He's really into music. He's like, somebody had to invent that, and now it's the gold standard of what artists aspire to. Right. But it wasn't, it was created. Yeah. It was fabricated. It's kind of like why, which is ironic that I'm an American, and I've been told the difference between American and Canadians is Canadians have more of this "who do you think you are" mentality, and Americans have more of this "who do you want to be" mentality, and kind of dare to dream. But in that sense, I think that the Gathering is only limited by our imagination and our courage to make big bets, and that's that's why I say it's on my mind right now. Is we're having to make some big bets and put our money where our mouth is, and stretch ourselves in a way into an uncomfortable place that frankly we hadn't been in the past couple of years. We kind of thought it was copy and paste, and now with COVID we're having to reimagine everything. With Cult, I think we're too small to do it on our own. I think we need more macro examples of the alternative, and that's why we have them. I mean, that's why these things go hand in hand. I mean, cults uses the gathering as a don't take our word for it, just listen to how awesome these guys are, and the things I rant about on social media and the books that we write and the podcasts that we do and all the things that we do try to get the word out. There needs to be more, because I think there's too much fear. There's too many old dogs. We need a whole generation of people to retire so that new, fresh thinking can get put into the C-suite. And so some of that's just timing.
Yeah.
And then with Communo, it's something like I said, a pandemic. We needed something to shock and awe the system.
Yeah.
So we kind of got what we asked for. The data was already suggesting that by 2025, more people will be self-employed than employed, but by a traditional employment arrangement, which is a pretty substantive shift. It hasn't been that way since farmers were lured into the factories at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, I mean, again, these are things that they're the rise and falls of empires based on how people think about work. And so I think Communo, again, is more about trying to build a surfboard that will ride a tidal wave of an existing macro trend versus
rather than
create
disrupt.
the tidal wave.
Okay, that makes sense. How old were you when you graduated university?
I graduated undergraduate in 97 as a 22-year-old, and then I went on to graduate school in 2000. It was an 18-month program, so I was 23 and a half.
All right, so like your last sort of days on campus, if right now you could teleport yourself back there, and you got like 5 minutes to talk to Chris at 23. You have 2 minutes to talk to Chris at 23. Are you changing anything? Are you giving any heads up? Are you saying, hey, just keep an eye on this?
I feel like I think the innovative idea I had, I felt like college was a mandatory obligation. Graduate school was not a foregone conclusion. I was more of the opinion I'd rather work for 2 more years and make money than go into debt for another 2 years and get an MBA. But at the time, I had a professor that talked to me about what they called niche MBAs. So it's like, do not just go get an MBA for getting an MBA's sake. If you can get into the right school. So I got lucky enough to get into Northwestern, which at the time and still is a top 10 program. So getting into the right school versus any school matters. And then I do not have a traditional MBA. I did not go to Kellogg. I went to Medill, and my MBA at the time was much more around direct marketing, database marketing, and what has become now e-commerce. You got to remember this is in '99, right? So it was very, very applicable for another tsunami that was taking over, which was Salesforce automation, database marketing, and all these things. You know, at the time prior to my degree, the biggest hirers of my program were like catalog marketers, LL Bean and Harry and David and Williams Sonoma, and then just imagine what's happened. Every one of those direct-to-consumer businesses has become an e-commerce business, and so I really feel like I was in the right place at the right time. I got wined and dined out of grad school and signing bonuses and moving bonuses, and the class 2 years after me couldn't get a job because the dot-com bubble had burst by the end of 2002. So I was in a really good window of time. Now, if you change the question to say, if I went back to 18-year-old Chris that graduated high school, I have a kid that has a learning disability and a mental health challenge, and it has opened my mind to my world to alternatives to education, period, and the deficiencies of the traditional education process. So I'm not even of the opinion kids should go to college anymore. I'm not anti-college, but particularly if you're entrepreneurial, a 4-year degree is going to do very little for your entrepreneurial pursuit. So I think that we need to change as a society the value that we put on these certificates from you're basically punting your due diligence to say, I'm going to let Harvard decide who's good, or I'm going to let Northwestern decide who's good, and I'm only going to recruit there. Versus you take a bet on my not only my business partner, but my head of business development, some of my best strategists. I think I was the only one in this cohort of strategic coach class that I went to that even has a college degree.
Well, we have 14 people here, and I assume these people went to university. I know Shallon, because we got her out of Mount Royal, but after that, I mean,
you don't know, don't care.
And
it's a meritocracy on talent and ability and aptitude.
I went to play football, and they told me I had to go to class. Or else
Yeah.
No, I hear you. Yeah. So then, would you have not have gone?
I probably would have, because I think I'm a little bit more square, but I think the people that I need to surround myself with are the dreamers and the movers and the shakers, and I could care less if they have a college degree.
Right. Now, this isn't all the time, but a lot of times companies that grow and scale, they have, strong leaders at the helm, and those strong leaders oftentimes, again, not always, have very specific and helpful routines. Are you a routine guy? And if so, talk to me about that.
I've got there's a weird wave going through my office right now of people that are paying this consultant. Not COVID, no. This is although, I mean, I don't know how healthy it is. There's this consultant that gets up at 5 a.m. and he's all about...
5 a.m. club.
Yeah, the 5 a.m. club. And it seems like a bit of a weird fad right now. I've been very, very lucky. A, I've always been a morning person. And B, I've always been just really self-aware. I think maybe the one thing I did get out of college, because I'm lazy, is I learned kind of, maximum benefit for minimum input kind of a thing. Yeah. So for me in particular, I'm not self-motivated to do homework. I don't know why I have to work after work. I mean, so I learned if I just go to class and I pay attention, that's my studying.
Right.
I'm all business, right? And I'm going to focus on it, but then I don't crack a book when I get home, and I don't have to study or cram for a test much, and I did pretty well. So I learned my own little style. I've always been a morning person. I remember also, this is not that long ago, since moving to Calgary, I remember one day waking up saying, if I was ever the boss, I would redo my schedule. Because I'm my most productive in the morning. So spending time showering and commuting is an hour that is wasted.
Right.
And then it was like, wait a second, you idiot, you are the boss. Yeah. And so I just told my staff, you're not going to see me until 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And I'm going to block off on my calendar 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. as I just label it productive time.
Right.
And it's awesome. In terms of, it allows me to do what I need to do best first thing in the morning. And then I'm my worst at like 3 to 5 p.m. So I tell my assistant, that put me on phone calls, let me do my emails. I can do staff meetings or, things that don't require my highest brain function. Yeah. To be able to do it. So I really have appreciated the ability to kind of organize my schedule around my own biorhythms, if you will, of how I know I'm going to come out of bed swinging. Yeah. So let's get that stuff taken care of first. And
you're flexible with that? Like, I mean, you'll switch up your routine. I was talking to Eric Varden from Arcane not too long ago, and he's like, as I was asking the question, he's already shaking his head. He's like, I have no routine. My routine is chaos.
Yeah, no, I'm not that way at all. In fact, when COVID first hit, it was the hardest thing for me was my kids, which are teenagers, started staying up really late because what was the purpose of them? They didn't have to get up in the morning for anything. So they all became nocturnal. But like if I wasn't in bed by 10:30, I can't get up by 6. And so I start going to bed at 12:30 or 1 because the kids are being noisy. And it was a good 4 or 5 weeks of feeling disoriented because my routine had been severely disrupted.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm worried about that now because we just got back into some semblance of routine and then we just went back on into lockdown. And no, I'm a bit of a creature of habit that way. I take notes the same way. I have the same sort of note-keeping system. My business partner seems to be kind of in a perpetual search for a system that will work for him.
A hack.
And I don't think that I need somebody else's system. I think I just need to focus on what I need because I see some of the things he does about how he prioritizes his day, and I'm like, that's not how I learn.
Well, it's amazing too how your routine changes. I got an 18-month that I'll hold it at home, and it's like 6 o'clock. Like a lot of days, I just leave my phone here, my computer here, because it's like you only get this opportunity once, right? So your big focus right now, like you were talking about, is helping pull those levers and turn the next page for the gathering. Here's a platform, a growing platform. What can the listeners do to get involved? Like, can we even sign up for the gathering this year?
Yep, absolutely. So the big new thing that will be kind of coming out next week is the virtual component of it.
It's more of a salient experience, isn't it? Isn't it a little bit more? It's not Zoom.
That's right. It's not Zoom. So I mean, that was a big part of it. So I think for the first 6 months, most virtual events sucked because people were not planning on them to be virtual. It was, our live event has been canceled, but we can't give everybody's money back, so let's create something. I do think now you're seeing more things, and that's what we're really trying to do is, I always remember, again, so I graduated in the early 2000s. The first websites were essentially digital brochures or flyers.
Some of them still are.
Some of them still are, right? But it was there was an awakening that said, why are we still constrained by, print logistics when it's not print anymore? So, make the things animate, make them movies, add audio, I remember Critical Mass, they made the car spin 360. Like, that was cool because people broke out of those paradigms. I think that's what we're starting to see now is people to say, okay, let's not create a Band-Aid. Let's actually build the ideal virtual experience.
Intentional about that being plan A versus
a lackluster plan B. And so I think it's one part the experience, but it's also, like I mentioned, one part trying to say we're trying to provide 12 months worth of value.
Right.
So if you like to learn and consume these types of stories, it seems weird to say, well, you have to log in at 9 a.m. on April 15th to get it.
Yeah,
it's like,
And these aren't no ones that are creating the content. Like I think last week the Inner Sanctum was Lakers.
Yeah. Most of our Inner Sanctums are intimate conversations with past winners.
Right.
That, and again, when you do it in Banff, it's expensive, it's inconvenient, it's constrained by 1,000 people. So it's like, I don't want this to be an elitist thing that if you're in the right place, the right time, with the right money, you can get in. By making it virtual, it is a way to democratize the content. It's a way to enhance our noble mission of helping expose brand leaders to what good looks like. Right. So I'm actually quite excited about it, and that's an example of where I think we would have been a little bit slower to this if COVID hadn't happened. We're using it as an accelerant.
Okay. And then quick on Communo, who's it for? How can we
So Communo is the one thing that has never changed is it's for the creative digital advertising practitioners. So you don't go to Communo to get a dog walker or an accountant or an architect. But what has changed is it's now not just for people that do those skills, but for people who need those skills. So we just announced today a big partnership with EA Sports. I mean, EA Sports, it's a cult brand, but it's an amazing company that builds some of the most iconic content. I'm a Madden fan, but there's all sorts of products that go through EA Sports, and they've completely reimagined how they're going to market themselves. And rather than have big bloated in-house teams, if they need PR or social media or marketing or keywords or whatever, they're going to go to Communo to get their talent hired there. So there was a big trend prior to COVID about in-house agencies. I think I saw right before COVID, 70% of businesses over $100 million had moved to an in-house agency. Maybe not exclusively, but it could be as a complement to their agency partner. So that was a reckoning we already had to deal with. But now a lot of those in-house teams have been decimated. They've been laid off. And so instead of going and rebuilding them when the economy recovers, they're just saying, you know what, maybe the best option is just pay to drink, pay for the specialists that we need, ad hoc, project-based. And so we're really excited about, NASA was a guinea pig, lots of the cannabis companies, Sage Wellness, and then we've got a who's who of brands that we'll be announcing here over the next 4 weeks that have said, all right, let's just source through
Right.
Communo. So
Right.
I think it's exciting for other brands to follow suit, but it's certainly exciting for practitioners like ourselves to say, I mean, that could be your new business pipeline.
Right.
Just start farming that thing.
Right. Well, and I know one of the things that I've done on Communo a lot is, we haven't necessarily been looking for business or for support on the resource side, but we haven't talked about the community element of it. Like, I just book meetings with people just to
Do this.
chat.
Sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, man.
I think one of the biggest things for creative professionals when it comes to growth is that they're not very good at business.
Right.
And that's not intentionally a dig. It's just a reality. They went to art school. Or I know that there's some creatives who, get hives looking into spreadsheet. Like, it's just not their thing. And yet they're wildly talented.
Yeah.
And so rarely is the issue of success for a creative practitioner their craft.
Yeah.
It's their business acumen
Yeah.
and how. So I find a lot of community support of just asking people about tax strategies or bookkeeping strategies, or the biggest one is business development. They just don't know how to sell and position and price and negotiate themselves very well. They're going up against professional procurement officers, right? They're going to lose that battle every day.
Yeah.
And so, I totally agree. We've never wanted to just be a job board. We never just wanted to be a place to only give and get work. So that's why we called it Communo. It's a commune where people can kind of give and take from each other. So I'm happy to hear that that's
Cool.
something that you're.
This is my very last question. Is there a macro trend that you're curious about right now that you encourage, either young business owners or seasoned business owners to be on the lookout for? Anything specific come to mind?
Well, I mean, there is no more macro trend that will knock you sideways than what's happening with remote work.
Yeah.
So I do think if you're a marketing manager with 20 people in your department, you would be best served to imagine what if you had 8 people in your department and had access to 12 or 50 or 100 contingent workers to do disparate things. From a cult brand standpoint, I think from 2000 to 2020, there was an interesting marriage between marketing and IT. And that was partly because there was databases and CRM and Salesforce and e-commerce platforms and point of sale and a lot of that stuff. I think the next 20 years, you're going to see an interesting marriage between marketing and HR. And you're going to start thinking about how to build a brand from the inside out. There'll be a war for talent. People are going to not just pick. If you can work and live anywhere, imagine what's just happened, right? Like, so if I don't have to live in San Francisco, if I don't have to live in New York, I can work and live, then who am I going to choose to give my time to?
Right.
It's going to be purpose-driven organizations with super innovative employee benefits and super cool projects. And HR is not usually very good at making, merchandising things, giving it sizzle, making it sound good. That's what marketers do really well. So I think that they're going to be reaching out, and that would be awesome. I think it's going to be a great thing for employer branding and for marketers to realize, motivating. We're working with a client right now that has 60,000 frontline employees. Like, they are a bigger manifestation of the brand than a TV commercial or a radio spot or a billboard. So are we properly indoctrinating them and energizing them and empowering them to deliver awesomeness? I think that's the next big frontier for marketing.
Awesome. Well, you've made a believer out of me in terms of jumping on this bandwagon of building loyalty and believability. So I'll continue to help you out on your mission, and I appreciate you, man. I love it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet.